He saw himself as a savior, someone who could provide everything she needed. Money, security, even love. Or so he convinced himself. She thought that money was her main goal in life. There are no easy answers in this story, but there is love, money, and death. Dear viewers, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Georgina Simons was born and raised in Newport, a lively Welsh town where she grew up surrounded by the daily hustle and laughter of her three brothers. In a household filled with boisterous personalities, she learned early on to be assertive and determined, qualities that soon blossomed into an unshakable confidence. Her family wasn't well off, so Georgina grew up understanding that if she wanted anything, she would have to work for it. She left school at 16, choosing the immediate prospect of employment over the uncertainty of academics. Her first job, a position at a call center, allowed her to earn her own money, though she soon realized it was a far cry from the life she envisioned. Alongside this job, Georgina enrolled in cosmetology courses, fascinated by the world of beauty and transformation. Shortly after, Georgina met Derek, a calm and stable man just 6 years older, whose grounded nature offered her a vision of security. Their relationship grew quickly, and within a year, at just 18, she gave birth to their daughter, Emily. Motherhood arrived like a gust of wind, leaving her exhilarated but also overwhelmed by the responsibilities and sacrifices it demanded. Adjusting to life as a young mother, Georgina moved into Derek's mother's house. Although grateful for a roof over their heads, she felt stifled in the modest, aging home with its perpetually damp walls and creaky floors. Her call center job provided just enough to get by, but each morning she awoke with a gnawing sense that she was meant for more. While Derek seemed content with their small, predictable world, Georgina's dissatisfaction grew, and so did her dreams of a life filled with luxury and excitement. Derek, a homebody who valued stability, had little interest in the extravagance or adventure that called to Georgina. Where he found peace in routine, she felt imprisoned, yearning for freedom and abundance. She voiced her frustrations often, talking about how hard they worked just to make ends meet. She knew Derek loved her, but his lack of ambition wore on her spirit, driving her to consider paths she had never imagined. Her desire to escape her ordinary life became her motivation. She began to pour her energy into her appearance, almost as if reinventing herself could create a bridge to a new life. Georgina soon embarked on a full transformation, reshaping herself in the image of the glamorous women she admired from afar. She spent hours perfecting her makeup, styling her hair, and refining her wardrobe, selecting clothes that accentuated her features in ways that demanded attention. Not long after, she underwent 2 breast augmentations, liposuction, and experimented with cosmetic enhancements that added to her allure. These changes opened doors into a world that had once seemed distant and unreachable. Georgina discovered burlesque and exotic dance, taking lessons that helped her embrace her body with confidence. Soon, she was performing at private dance clubs, her every move carefully crafted to captivate her audience. Here, she earned in one night what she would have made in a week at the call center, and with each paycheck, her hunger for a life of wealth and freedom intensified. With her newfound financial independence, Georgina managed to move herself, Derek, and their daughter out of his mother's house and into their own apartment. For the first time, she felt a spark of autonomy, a taste of the life she wanted. But it wasn't enough. The apartment, while an improvement, felt like just another stepping stone on her path to something greater. Her ambitions continued to grow, fueled by the luxury that now felt tantalizingly close. As her income from the club plateaued, Georgina began contemplating the next step, working as a high-end escort. She rationalized it as a way to secure a better future for Emily, her desire for financial freedom overriding any hesitations. In secret, she registered on an app under the alias Hannah James, presenting herself as a confident and alluring woman with specific skills, offering exclusive services to wealthy clients. She knew her looks and charm would attract attention, and she was right. Her profile gained popularity, her inbox filled with inquiries from men intrigued by the allure she projected. The app quickly became her gateway into an entirely different world, one that promised the lifestyle she craved. Derek was aware of Georgina's decision but was conflicted. While he loved her deeply, the risks and moral questions surrounding her work weighed on him. However, his desire to keep her in his life and his fear of losing her to this new path led him to a reluctant compromise. They agreed to an open relationship with strict boundaries that kept her activities hidden from their families and friends. This arrangement created a veil of secrecy that shielded their lives from scrutiny, and Georgina slipped seamlessly into her double life. Georgina's new identity as Hannah James quickly became popular. She knew how to tailor her presence to appeal to men like Peter Morgan, men who sought escape, adventure, and the thrill of being with a woman who could fulfill their fantasies. Peter Morgan, a man who spent most of his life in relative comfort and control. Born in 1962 on a sprawling 300-acre farm near Newport, Peter was no stranger to wealth or influence. From a young age, he understood that his life path had already been sketched out for him by generations before him. He would work the land, manage the family farm, and live a stable, predictable life, much like his parents before him. A midlife crisis began to take shape, seeping into his thoughts and driving him to live differently. No longer content with the simple, structured life he once held, Peter felt an urge to experience life in ways that were extravagant, thrilling, even reckless. What began as minor indulgences soon snowballed into something far more consuming. Peter purchased luxury cars, a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, and acquired an enormous mansion, filling it with symbols of excess, from a restored military tank to a private helicopter. But these outward signs of his wealth and influence only hinted at deeper changes brewing within him, changes that would shift his life in unimaginable directions. It was on a business trip to Amsterdam that Peter first tasted a life entirely separate from his rural roots. At a private club, in a haze of music and low-lit allure, he crossed a personal boundary, paying a performer for services that awakened in him an insatiable desire for experiences beyond his marriage and family life. This singular act of infidelity was just the beginning of a pattern that would soon consume him. From then on, Peter balanced a double life. He maintained the appearance of a devoted husband and father while indulging in secret, forbidden pleasures that became more elaborate and more frequent with each passing month. Peter's life took yet another turn in 2011, when a friend introduced him to an app that connected clients with elite escorts. To Peter, this was an invitation into a world where fantasies could become reality with a mere swipe. Obsessed, he threw himself into this digital world, scrolling through profiles and arranging clandestine meetings across the country, from Newport to Cardiff. Each encounter was unique, and he had a rule: never see the same woman twice. This ensured that he could keep his escapades purely physical, devoid of emotion, and easily hidden from his family. His wife, Helen, remained blissfully unaware, wrapped up in her own world of responsibilities and obligations. Peter's skill at deception was finely honed. Each business trip was simply another disguise for his double life. Then came 2012, and with it, Peter's 50th birthday, a milestone that seemed to spur him toward even more dangerous desires. In May 2012, Peter Morgan, a wealthy entrepreneur struggling with the emptiness of his midlife, came across Georgina Simon's profile. He was instantly captivated by her image, and something in her eyes seemed to echo his own unspoken desires. He arranged a meeting, and on their first date, they had dinner together, making casual conversation that seemed to draw them closer with each passing minute. Peter was fascinated not only by Georgina's beauty, but by her wit, her self-assuredness, and the sense of mystery that enveloped her. She held his attention in a way few others had, and he found himself willing to pay any price for her company. That evening, their interaction began simply. He paid her a modest sum for a kiss, but by the morning, the transaction had evolved into something far more significant. For Peter, this wasn't just another rendezvous. It was the beginning of an obsession. Georgina, however, approached it purely as business, another opportunity to inch closer to the luxurious life she wanted. For Peter, this wasn't just another encounter. It felt like a revival of his youth, a chance to rekindle the spirit he feared was fading with age. What started as occasional, impersonal rendezvous quickly evolved. Their encounters increased from once a month to once a week, and Peter, wealthy and accustomed to getting what he wanted, didn't flinch at the escalating costs. It became clear that he wasn't just paying for her time. He was paying to keep her close, to experience the intimacy and thrill he found so rare in his life. As their time together grew, so did Peter's affections. He began to feel that his attraction to her had become more than just physical. Soon, their dates extended beyond their usual hotel rooms to the world outside. Peter wanted to share experiences with her, to escape the confines of their clandestine encounters. They dined at fine restaurants, caught late-night movie screenings, and spent long evenings laughing over glasses of wine. Georgina became the center of his fantasies, and Peter started to see her as more than just an escort. She was a companion, someone who filled a profound void in his life. Peter's feelings for Georgina blossomed into something that bordered on obsession. The boundaries between their transactional relationship and his emotional attachment blurred, especially as he began to shower her with gifts meant to prove his affection. He bought her designer clothes, luxurious jewelry, and extravagant shoes, each present an attempt to bind her closer to him. He even went so far as to gift her a red Ferrari, a symbol of the fast-paced, glamorous life he wanted her to enjoy by his side. For one weekend when his family was away, he paid her a staggering $10,000 just to spend the weekend with him in his own home. A bold risk that underscored just how invested he had become. In his mind, these gifts were acts of devotion, expressions of his desire for her companionship and his eagerness to integrate her into his world. Helen, his wife, remained oblivious to the drama unfolding in her own home. To Peter, Helen's absence during these weekends felt liberating, as if a weight had been lifted, allowing him to indulge in the fantasy that Georgina could one day replace his wife entirely. But for Georgina, their affair was business and nothing more. She accepted his gifts with grace but felt no deeper connection to him. Her focus remained firmly on the financial stability he provided, an arrangement she calculated to benefit her and her daughter. Beyond that, she harbored no interest in Peter's growing affection or his attempts to bring her closer. To her, he was just a wealthy man willing to pay for her time, and she continued to see other clients with no remorse. Even her boyfriend Derek remained a fixture in her life, a constant shadow that Peter neither saw nor acknowledged. Despite her lack of emotional attachment, Peter's jealousy flared whenever he thought of Georgina's other clients. The idea of her being with anyone else was intolerable, so he devised a solution: exclusivity. He offered her an exorbitant monthly payment of $133,000, an amount so substantial that Georgina could comfortably cover all her expenses, allowing her to turn down other clients and dedicate herself solely to him. She agreed, knowing she would earn more from this arrangement than from juggling multiple clients. The financial security appealed to her pragmatism, and she accepted his offer, marking the beginning of an arrangement that would entangle both their lives in ways they hadn't foreseen. With exclusivity came a shift in their dynamic. To ensure privacy and control, Peter moved her into a small bungalow on his estate, ostensibly for her safety and that of her daughter, though it was just as much about keeping her isolated. The primary house, a grand but aging mansion, was off-limits, as Peter insisted it was uninhabitable. Her boyfriend Derek was strictly forbidden from setting foot on the estate, a rule Peter enforced to maintain his grip on Georgina's life. In his mind, he was crafting a fairy tale for her, one where she was the princess and he, the benevolent benefactor. He transformed the bungalow into a luxurious haven, complete with anything she could possibly need. But while Peter envisioned this as a paradise, to Georgina, it began to feel more like a gilded cage, a life controlled and monitored by a man who mistook his wealth for ownership. For 3 years, Peter filled her world with lavish comforts, taking her on trips to London, Cape Town, and across Europe. He indulged her every whim, funded cosmetic treatments, and splurged on extravagant vacations meant to dazzle her. They spent their days riding ATV, strolling down manicured paths, and watching movies in a private theater he had arranged for her enjoyment. He even planned family-like activities for them, despite the lack of genuine family ties. In his mind, she was no longer an escort, but a fixture in his life, someone he treated almost as a second wife. But Peter's vision of an idyllic life couldn't mask the strain building beneath the surface. Georgina, while enjoying the luxuries, felt increasingly confined. She played along, maintaining her role and offering Peter the illusion of a relationship, but her thoughts remained distant. She never allowed herself to reciprocate his feelings, understanding that her role was to provide a fantasy, not reality. Peter's grand gestures and relentless attention had not broken through her emotional defenses. To her, this arrangement was temporary, a means to achieve financial freedom, but she never saw it as permanent. Meanwhile, her boyfriend, Derek, struggled with the new distance that had crept into their relationship. He noticed her growing detachment, the way her priorities had shifted. The longer she stayed with Peter, the less time she spent with Derek, and it tore at his sense of self-worth. Derek, once content with their life together, now felt inadequate, as if he were a mere placeholder. He couldn't compete with Peter's wealth or the lifestyle she now enjoyed. Desperate to bridge the gap, Derek began a transformation of his own, determined to rekindle the spark they once shared. He started working out, obsessively chasing a physical ideal he thought would make him more appealing to her. He bought designer clothes he could barely afford, whitened his teeth, and adopted a polished, sophisticated appearance, hoping to win back her attention. Yet his efforts felt futile. He could sense that Georgina's interest in him had waned, overshadowed by the allure of the life Peter provided. The relationship he valued now seemed to be slipping through his fingers, leaving him feeling lost and betrayed. The harsh reality was that no amount of self-improvement could match the luxury and security Peter offered her. Derek was a man grounded in love and loyalty, but these qualities felt insufficient in the face of her growing materialism. As the months passed, the strain between them became almost unbearable. Derek found himself questioning the life they had shared, wondering if it had all been an illusion. For Georgina, the once unremarkable life she had led with him seemed like a distant memory, a chapter she felt no obligation to return to. The luxurious estate, the gifts, the high-end lifestyle, all served to further separate her from the man who had once been her anchor. And for Derek, the painful truth grew clearer with every passing day. He had lost her to a world he could never touch, a world crafted by a man whose wealth and control had slowly erased the connection they once shared. Yet beneath the illusion of happiness and wealth, the cracks in Peter and Georgina's relationship grew deeper. Their fairy tale existence was precarious, built on Peter's obsessive need for control and Georgina's calculated indifference. The isolated estate, intended to be a sanctuary, had become a theater of quiet tensions and unspoken truths. For Peter, every smile she gave, every touch she allowed, reinforced his fantasy. But for Georgina, each interaction reminded her of the cost of her freedom and of the price she had paid to escape one life, only to find herself trapped in another. Helen Morgan had always known her husband, Peter, led a complex and sometimes secretive life. But over the years, she'd learned to ignore the red flags that cropped up occasionally. Sudden business trips, unexplained absences, and an emotional distance that settled between them like a quiet storm. For a long time, she convinced herself that these suspicions were simply part of the sacrifices they made for the lifestyle they both enjoyed. Yet everything shifted one evening when Helen found an incriminating receipt hidden among Peter's belongings. A receipt for an extravagant bouquet addressed to a woman she had never heard of. For Helen, this was the proof she'd been both seeking and dreading. She now knew her husband's betrayal was more than a suspicion. It was reality. The discovery cut deep, but Helen made a calculated choice. She didn't confront Peter outright. Instead, she distanced herself, building an invisible wall between them and focusing on the familiar comforts of her daily routine. She grew colder, reserving her warmth and energy for her children and the few activities that brought her solace. She buried herself in charity events, social gatherings, and her morning rituals, filling her days with a structured, carefully maintained schedule. It was a silent resignation, a choice to live parallel lives rather than tear her family apart. To anyone on the outside, it looked like Helen was at peace with the arrangement, but only she knew the true toll it was taking on her heart. Meanwhile, Georgina, with her two competing worlds, had taken to referring to her two partners in a way that betrayed her own indifference. She began calling Peter Rich Pete and her longtime boyfriend simply Poor Pete. The distinction was humiliating for her boyfriend, who had already struggled with feelings of inadequacy. He'd poured himself into self-improvement, but nothing he did could match the allure of Peter's wealth and influence. Each time Georgina flippantly used these nicknames, it deepened his sense of failure, further reminding him that, in her eyes, he would never measure up. Inside the opulent walls of Peter's estate, life continued in a surreal bubble of wealth and indulgence, completely isolated from reality. Peter funded Georgina's every need, paying her exorbitant fees that allowed her to maintain her lavish lifestyle. She no longer saw herself as a struggling single mother, but as someone who could afford the luxuries she had always dreamed of, though they came with a cost to her soul. To keep things interesting, Georgina started inviting other women into their encounters. She had become a master of keeping Peter entertained, knowing his wealth relied on his satisfaction. She was adept at reading his desires, picking women who would heighten his excitement while she remained the center of his attention. One night, while his wife and children were away, Peter invited Georgina and one of her escort friends to his family home. They spent the night in the marital bedroom, where Peter, caught up in the fantasy, asked one of the women to wear Helen's dress, pretending for a brief and twisted moment that his wife was part of the tryst. The idea of Helen joining this secret part of his life thrilled him, a twisted indulgence that he knew could never happen in real life. What Peter didn't know was that Georgina was secretly recording the entire night. She filmed everything, from her friend changing into Helen's dress to the events that unfolded in the bedroom. This footage would later serve as a weapon, a dangerous piece of leverage Georgina kept tucked away, aware of its potential consequences. For the time being, it was merely insurance, a safeguard should she ever need to protect herself. As their affair continued, Peter's life began to unravel. His obsession with Georgina strained every aspect of his personal life, and the repercussions spread quickly. Derek, her boyfriend, had reached his limit. His love for Georgina had once given him strength, but now, feeling replaced and utterly broken, he made the difficult decision to leave her. This decision marked the first major crack in Georgina's world. Though she was indifferent at first, Derek's absence left a hole she didn't know how to fill. He had been her anchor, the one consistent part of her life outside of her arrangement with Peter. Without him, her world started to feel emptier, even in all its lavishness. It wasn't long before Helen discovered the truth herself. She accidentally stumbled upon a series of explicit messages between her husband and Georgina, messages that shattered her remaining resolve. Confronted with undeniable proof of Peter's infidelity, Helen finally reached her breaking point. This time, she wouldn't stay silent. She confronted Peter, listening as he fumbled through excuses and half-hearted apologies, but her mind was made up. Helen filed for divorce, demanding a substantial portion of their assets, determined to leave him with as little as possible for the pain he had inflicted. For Georgina, life took a swift, tragic turn. In the span of months, two devastating events shook her to her core. The first tragedy struck in mid-2015, when her father took his own life. The news hit her like a wave, dragging her into depths of grief she had never known. She realized, in the wake of his passing, how much she had lost touch with the people who mattered most, her family bonds severed by the life she had chosen. Before she could even begin to process this loss, she was struck by a second tragedy. Her ex-boyfriend, Derek, who had struggled with depression after their breakup, took his own life. Found alone in a wooded area, he left behind only the ghost of a life once shared with Georgina and their daughter. The news broke her, leaving her to face the consequences of her decisions in the most painful way. With these losses, Georgina fell into a profound darkness. Once a confident, ambitious woman, she became a shadow of herself, plagued by grief and remorse. Alcohol and drugs became her refuge, numbing the relentless pain that haunted her. Her life spiraled into a bleak cycle of self-destruction, her lavish lifestyle now overshadowed by a pervasive despair that money could not ease. Her relationship with Peter deteriorated as well. The charm of wealth, once enough to keep her tethered to him, lost its allure. She began to pull away, refusing his attempts to keep her close. Peter, feeling the shift in her demeanor, became desperate to regain her attention. But it was too late. The person Georgina had once been was gone, replaced by someone barely holding on to life. The castle walls that had once felt grand and invincible became suffocating, trapping her in memories she longed to escape. In his attempts to salvage their relationship, Peter only drove her further away, his wealth and gifts now hollow symbols of a life she no longer desired. For Peter, Helen's departure and Georgina's emotional withdrawal marked the downfall of the carefully curated life he had tried so hard to control. He was left with a hollow existence, watching as everything he once valued slipped beyond his grasp. Meanwhile, Georgina, lost in a fog of guilt and regret, knew that her choices had come at an unimaginable cost, leaving her alone with memories that haunted her every waking moment. Deep down, Georgina harbored a growing resentment toward Peter. Though she rarely admitted it, even to herself, she blamed him for Derek's tragic death. She saw him as the catalyst that had upended her life, the one who had set her down a path she'd never fully chosen. To escape from Peter's relentless control, Georgina began seeking solace in the company of a longtime friend, someone she had known for years and trusted. Unlike her relationship with Peter, her connection with this man was one of genuine care and mutual respect. With him, she felt free from the expectations and pressures that now defined her life with Peter. In his presence, she rediscovered parts of herself that had been lost amid the trappings of wealth and the toll of the relentless lifestyle Peter had introduced her to. This new relationship grew, offering Georgina a way to reclaim her sense of identity. Peter, however, had become possessive, unable to tolerate the idea of Georgina seeking companionship elsewhere. In his mind, he had invested too much in her, his time, his wealth, and his affection. And he felt entitled to exclusive control over her life. He saw himself not only as her benefactor, but also as the person who provided for her and her daughter. His financial power over her, he believed, gave him the right to dictate the terms of her existence. He made sure she understood this, constantly reminding her of the countless expenses he had covered, each reminder layered with subtle threats to withdraw his support. But Georgina had reached a point where Peter's control no longer intimidated her. She grew defiant, refusing to submit to his demands, and their relationship became a tense, volatile standoff. At events, Georgina openly insulted him, her sharp words echoing across the gatherings, leaving Peter humiliated and seething. Her fiery personality, once part of what drew him to her, had now turned against him in ways he hadn't anticipated. To his friends, he made excuses for her behavior, passing it off as harmless rebellion. But each public confrontation chipped away at his pride, revealing cracks in his carefully constructed world. As her defiance grew, so did her self-destructive tendencies. Georgina turned to alcohol and drugs with increasing frequency, attempting to dull the pain and disappointment that had seeped into her life. The habit grew into a crutch, and soon, rumors about her troubled lifestyle reached the ears of Child Protective Services. Authorities, concerned for her daughter's welfare, launched an investigation to determine whether Georgina was fit to care for her child, Emily. For Georgina, this was a terrifying turn of events, one that brought her the bitter realization of how far her life had spiraled out of control. When she heard of the inquiry, her first thought was to blame Peter, convinced he was the one who had alerted social services in a twisted attempt to control her further. Despite the lack of any evidence linking him to the investigation, she was certain that Peter was behind it, and her mind began to fixate on this belief. The anger simmered into a fury that finally erupted in a confrontation. Their shouting match quickly became the center of a scandal, with accusations flying on both sides. For Peter, who thrived on control, Georgina's growing defiance and rage were unfathomable. He had never expected her to turn on him so dramatically. Determined to reassert his dominance, Peter resorted to extreme measures. He began to spy on her, unable to shake the feeling that he was losing her to someone else. Leveraging his access to the estate, he discreetly installed listening devices in the bungalow where Georgina lived. These devices were equipped with SIM cards, which allowed him to call into them and eavesdrop at any moment. Daily, Peter would dial into these devices, anxiously listening to hours of conversations, hoping to catch Georgina in some compromising situation or to hear proof of her supposed disloyalty. The eavesdropping soon morphed into an obsession, and he would sometimes call the devices up to 10 times a day, unable to shake the gnawing insecurity that consumed him. For over 2 months, the recordings yielded little but mundane conversations. Small talk with friends, moments with her daughter, and the occasional chat with a visitor. But on January 10th, 2016, Peter's suspicions finally paid off. That day, Georgina had a close friend over, and their conversation turned to Peter himself. When he called in to listen, he was shocked to hear Georgina speak openly about him, venting her frustrations and revealing just how unhappy she was. She admitted to her friend that her life with Peter had become unbearable, that she felt trapped by his financial support and haunted by his constant scrutiny. She even mentioned her belief that he was behind the child services inquiry, confirming Peter's worst fear, that Georgina saw him not as a protector or benefactor, but as an oppressor. Although the child services investigation had concluded with no findings against her, Georgina kept this information to herself. She saw in the inquiry an opportunity to manipulate Peter further, realizing that the mere threat of losing her daughter was enough to hold his attention and unlock his generosity. She began to exaggerate her fears, hinting that the situation was still unresolved, playing into Peter's sense of guilt and responsibility to extract more money. For her, this was survival. For Peter, it was a tightening leash. But Georgina's plans didn't stop there. As Peter listened, he was horrified to hear her lay out a more elaborate scheme. She told her friend that she intended to convince Peter to sign over the bungalow to her, planning to use it as leverage when she eventually left him. This, however, was only part of her plot. She confided that she possessed a compromising video from a night long ago, the recording she had taken of their intimate encounter with her friend dressed in Helen's clothes. When Peter heard Georgina's scheme in full, a chill settled over him as he realized just how deeply she had planned to dismantle his life. But in his desperation, Peter saw only one option left. He needed to regain control, no matter the cost. On the morning of January 11th, Peter started plotting his revenge, meticulously crafting a plan to stop Georgina from executing hers. The following day, his intentions became clear through his online search history. As he researched the tools he might need to carry out his plan. By January 12th, Peter went to a hardware store, filling his cart with rope, zip ties, plastic bags, and rubber gloves. Each item he selected with methodical precision, his mind focused only on the steps he would take to reclaim what he felt he had lost. Once he returned to the estate, he didn't waste time. He headed directly to Georgina's bungalow, his heart pounding as he prepared to confront her. In a desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their twisted relationship, Peter even made one last reckless offer. He threw a stack of cash at her feet, promising everything she'd ever wanted: marriage, wealth, even a life insurance policy that would name her as the beneficiary. He told her she'd inherit $1 million if anything happened to him. But Georgina's face remained unchanged, cold and unyielding. Her refusal cut through him, but it was the hatred in her eyes that finally pushed him over the edge. She didn't see him as a lover or even a partner. In her mind, he was nothing more than a fool, a puppet she had manipulated for gain. Her rejection was laced with contempt, and with every word, his fury grew. Grabbing the rope he had brought, he looped it around her neck, initially intending only to intimidate her, to make her understand the seriousness of her actions. But when she laughed, taunting him and threatening that he would pay dearly for every hurt she had suffered, Peter's restraint vanished. In a blind rage, he tightened the rope, shutting his eyes and allowing his anger and frustration to dictate his actions. It was only when Georgina went still that he realized what he had done. Moving mechanically, Peter donned the rubber gloves, bound her wrists and ankles with zip ties, and wrapped her body in plastic. His mind buzzed with a singular focus: concealment. Transporting her to an old family property, Peter stashed her body in an outbuilding, convinced that no one would find her there. Yet in his haste, he overlooked crucial details. Security cameras, which he himself had installed on the estate, captured his every move, and Georgina's mobile phone, which he had neglected to turn off, continued to broadcast her location. By evening, when Georgina failed to pick up her daughter, her friends and family began to worry. Her absence was quickly noted, and by nightfall, the police had initiated a search. The investigation escalated rapidly, with Peter soon becoming the prime suspect. Initially, he tried to maintain a composed facade, telling officers that he had seen her around noon but that she had dismissed him afterward. However, the police traced Georgina's phone signal to his property, uncovering the lie. When detectives pressed him further, Peter attempted to shift the story, claiming he had taken Georgina's phone only to protect her from her own worsening habits. After hours of intense interrogation, Peter finally broke down, confessing to Georgina's death. He tried to paint himself as a man driven to the brink, pushed by desperation and betrayal. He claimed that he had offered her everything in an attempt to salvage their relationship, only to be met with cruelty and deceit. But his attempts at justification fell on unsympathetic ears. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession, the surveillance footage, and the tools he had purchased all pointed to premeditated intent. The trial of Peter Morgan quickly became a sensational case, drawing significant public attention. The media delved into every sordid detail, painting Peter as a man consumed by obsession, unable to let go of a relationship that had long been dead. Despite his initial confession, he later tried to argue for leniency, citing mental health issues and emotional turmoil in an attempt to reduce his charge to manslaughter. His defense team argued that he had been a man under extreme psychological strain, unable to think clearly in the face of Georgina's alleged betrayal. However, the prosecution countered with the extensive planning he had undertaken, including the hardware purchases and his calculated moves following the crime. The evidence was irrefutable, and the court was unswayed by his pleas. In the end, Peter Morgan was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years before eligibility for parole.